Hi, welcome. Thank you for coming. Tell us about yourselves. What are your names?
I'm Mairead Canning.
My name is Matt Post.
And Matt Post, you were the SMOB in what year?
I was the 40th student member of the board last year in 2017 and 2018.
And May, what are you involved with?
So I'm the co-founder of DC Teens Action, and I'm also the president of WJ Students Against Gun Violence here at WJ.
What is DC Teens Action?
So DC Teens Action is a student political organization. We do a lot of different things. Every month we have a theme that involves local DC issues, and we address those themes and we educate our members on them, and then we do a service project that involves those themes.
What are some examples of different themes?
So this month in January we're doing food justice, and we're talking about the different ways that food is important to people in DC.
Matt, what was your top priority as SMOB?
The main thing that I was focusing on was lowering and shrinking the racial and socioeconomic disparities in opportunity and outcomes for students in the county. For far too long, students who are coming from marginalized backgrounds, lower socioeconomic status, folks who don't look like me, or black and brown students weren't achieving at the same levels of affluent white students. And that's not their fault. Those are structural things, systemic things that the county was failing to do. And I wanted to level the playing field structurally for all students in the county.
So what did you do to achieve that? How did you work to achieve that?
When the operating budget season came around, I pushed for expanding pre-K, which we did. I was able to push going from 0 of my colleagues with me to all my colleagues with me for adding $750,000 for our ESOL students, our English learner students, giving them more social emotional support. These students are coming to us with just incredible, unspeakable trauma, and every year the support and resources available to those students actually decline. They don't go up, even as that population becomes a larger and larger percentage of our overall student body. Last year we had 23,000 students who didn't speak English in the system, and I thought it was our moral obligation to provide for them. And I also did a lot of little things. I was able to get Eid al-Fitr, a Muslim holiday, taken off in the school year calendar, just as we do for our Judeo-Christian holidays in the county. As a Jew, I understood how nice it was to never have to pick between my faith and my education, and I thought we should extend that to the next largest religious group in our system. And I was also a big proponent and pusher for a plan that would have decreased the de facto segregation that still exists in this county, both socioeconomically and racially, but I was unsuccessful at the time at pushing that through. Didn't get the votes.
And what work did you do specifically for the March for Our Lives movement?
Yeah, so it was in my role as the student member, I started talking to more of our English learner students, usually through translators at schools like Blair and Kennedy, and my own school, Sherwood. And I came to understand a consistent feature of these students, which is that they had experienced trauma, often involving gun violence, either here or in their home country. And only 2 out of every 3 ESOL students in the system graduate. So I began to see the connection between interaction with violence, especially gun violence, and educational and social outcomes. And then when Parkland happened, I realized that I needed to use my platform as someone on a school board to prevent gun violence using policy. Not just the kind that happen in schools, but the kind of gun violence that is happening every day across the country in marginalized communities, in communities of color. So after Parkland, I passed a resolution at the board table which used the school board's influence to call on our state policymakers to pass more comprehensive gun control. We endorsed the student demonstrations that were happening at the time, and we started a system-wide school safety review, as well as encouraging our constituents to go to the March for Our Lives. And then when students were planning a walkout on March 14th, I helped clear things behind the scenes administratively, making sure that principals and central office staff weren't going to try to crush the walkout or the protest or the demonstrations. And because of my work with that, and because so many of my friends were organizing the walkout, they invited me to speak there. I gave a speech, thought it was all right at the time, and then it went viral, and the March for Our Lives folks reached out to me. I spoke at the March for Our Lives in DC, and I started doing some work for them, and they decided to hire me part-time as their national field strategist.
May, what work did you do with March for Our Lives?
So March for Our Lives was a really important moment for DC Teens Action. It was kind of the thing that founded the group. What happened was at WJ, some of you guys might remember, but there was a bomb threat on the day of one of the walkouts, and they had brought us all into the football field. And I remember thinking that we were in the middle of this field, and it was on the day of this walkout, and anything could have happened. We were in the middle of like this super open space, and they told us all that we had to leave immediately from this field and go somewhere else because they felt like it was unsafe to be there, because they were worried of some sort of shooter or something like that. And I remember thinking that, like, I remember feeling that fear, and I remember seeing my friends feel that fear. And we decided, like, this is the fear people feel every day. Other people feel this on a daily basis. Other people feel this all the time. And we can put a stop to that, and we can try to help other people by doing that. Another thing we were thinking about is how we have this amazing privilege by living near DC, where we're able to speak directly to our Congress people, and we're able to speak directly to these leaders in government, and other people around the country aren't able to do that. So what we decided we had to do was make it possible for other students and other individuals who wanted to speak to their Congress people, or who wanted to speak at this big march, to make that easy for them to come do. So we created a housing program which housed activists with local people.
How many would you say?
We got about 500 responses. I believe we housed about 300 student activists from all across the country, and we got.
How many per household?
We had one household with like 12 people.
Whoa.
We had one household with one. It was really depending on how many people, how many students or people one house could take, but the response was so amazing. So many people emailed us, so many people got in touch with us and said, we have an extra bedroom, or we want to give you money, how can we give you money? Or like, we got an email from someone in New York who was like, oh, well, I don't know if you want, but I have a house and it's in New York, but people can come down from New York on that day. And we were like, that might be a little bit too far, but people were just so excited to email us and to try to help. Like, there was these grandparents from Alaska, and they emailed us and they went, we saw an article in the Washington Post about you guys, and we just wanted to tell you that we believe in what you're doing so much, and we are so proud of young people and what you're doing, and we want to help in any way we can. And they gave us money from Alaska, and that was the moment where I kind of realized, like, this is the most amazing thing I'm ever going to be involved in my whole life. This is amazing, just the amount of people who are responding.
So it was all based on donations from other families?
Yeah, it was based on donations. We put some of our own money into it, but mostly we got people to donate Metro cards, and we got people to donate Giant gift cards or Target gift cards, and we bought food for marchers. We also got local DC restaurants to donate food to our potluck, and I think we had about 160 bagged lunches that we had for the day of the march for people who are in our housing program to have.
Why do you think that Parkland that there have been school shootings before. Immediately after Parkland, there was another shooting, like a week or so later here in Maryland. But why was Parkland the one that sort of set everything off? Why did Parkland create your organization? Why did Parkland give you the platform to speak? What was it about Parkland that made it so different?
I think that's a challenging question, and one that a lot of gun violence prevention activists struggle with. I think primarily it's an affluent white area, and the people who change things or in positions of power look like the people in Parkland. So they're able to see themselves in both the victims and the people who spoke out. But I think also Broward County Schools is a big, good school system. And they prepared students to be active citizens in the world, like Montgomery County does. These are students who took debate, were involved in theater, had refined public speaking skills. And I think after, Parkland happened after a string of mass shootings too. I think there was a general building of a fever that when it got to Parkland, it was like a fever point that the people of that community, instead of fading away and grieving, raged. And I think that anger was so different and so struck people that it launched something entirely new. It wasn't a despair. It was a really profound anger.
Yeah, I definitely think there's also something to be said about the fact that there were a lot of high schoolers looking at this who have lived with these mass shootings their entire lives. Like Columbine happened before I was born, and they've lived with this their entire lives. We've all experienced lockdowns and those drills, and seeing other people our age speaking out and saying something in that way, I think made a lot of people realize that the situations they were in aren't normal and aren't okay.
So what was sort of your top priorities did you see the Parkland shooting advancing as quickly as it did? Did you see when you first heard about the shooting, did you see it building up this movement? What were your reactions to this movement that grew and grew and grew and exploded?
So by the time I got involved with DC Teens Action and things like that, there had already been a lot of kind of viral moments from the Parkland shootings. There had already been a lot of very the media had already been kind of rolling with this. I would definitely say that I didn't think it would get to the point it got, especially with kind of like on a more local personal level. Like I have a lot of friends who got involved with this and then became, pretty prominent people. And I definitely didn't expect that. But I think that there's some level of it was time for this to happen. Like, it was time for something to change in this debate.
Yeah, I remember, I think more than anything, that what happened after Parkland reaffirmed my belief in, democracy and social justice movements in this country. I was hardened and cynical that anything was going to happen. I was in middle school when Sandy Hook happened, and when it's foundational to you that little kids can die in school and nothing can happen and people can be so heartless as to just ignore that, I thought that nothing was ever going to change. But then I remember seeing Emma Gonzalez's speech where she was furious and militant and insurgent and refusing to believe the common line that it was a time for mourning, it was a time for thoughts and prayers, and action would come later, when she was refusing to take the political orthodoxy of how these things are supposed to work. It energized me. And watching Emma and seeing my friends have that same reaction, seeing that, a week, 2 weeks later, people were still talking about the shooting, it was still on the front page of the Washington Post, I thought that this time might be different and that maybe we were reaching a turning point.
Yeah, I definitely remember that speech, Emma Gonzalez's speech, as being kind of I remember watching that speech and feeling like how much heart she was putting into this and how much pain and fear was being aimed into that speech, into something that was constructive. And she was showing her anger. And I think that was anger that we all felt on some level. Like, I definitely saw her speech and felt the same way and felt those things that she was feeling. And I think that kind of a lot of us realized that this was something that we could say, and it wasn't something we could just accept.
How would you respond to those people who say that they're crisis actors?
Well, have you been called a crisis actor yet?
Yeah, well, after I gave my speech, everyone in the comments was like, "You're telling me that there's a 12th grader who has a 5 o'clock shadow at like 9 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense."
Yeah,
Like,
I have been
point.
too. This is something that we can both speak on because we've both been called crisis actors. You know, it's a way that people want to react out of fear that because we're right, and because they don't want to acknowledge that what we're saying is actually an issue. They would rather just believe that we aren't actually real, that we're fake people.
And you heard the Louis C.K. comments about the Parkland survivors. To the Parkland survivors, he said, "You're not interesting because you went to a high school where kids got shot. Why does that mean I have to listen to you? How does that make you interesting? You didn't get shot. You pushed some fat kid in the way, and then now I gotta listen to you talking."
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the Louis C.K. thing is, like, I'm not above dark humor that, like, makes a point, right? But it just wasn't funny. It was, like, Facebook minion meme level content, you know? Like, it wasn't making a point, it wasn't, like, satirical, it was just him being, like, an asshole. And, like, it's a shame, because I think Louis C.K. used to be kind of funny. And I guess now he's like washed up and is like all those other weird uncles posting on Facebook about being left behind by things like gender pronouns. It's just kind of just like a sad situation. I don't think we should be giving him any more attention.
I agree with that. I think Louis C.K. is pandering to the group that is still going to listen to his comedy in a lot of ways. Like, he has kind of cut himself off from a demographic he used to have control over because of the things he did and the things he refuses to apologize for. And he is pandering to a group that's still going to listen to him, and that's the group that, you know, would find that stuff funny in a way that I don't personally find funny, and I think a lot of other people don't find funny.
So also with the crisis actors comes with the NRA and the fact that the NRA led a lot of public comments against the Parkland survivors and you guys and organizers in general. And how did you work against an entire organization working against you?
I mean, there's a lot of calcified politics around gun violence, and for some reason, people are afraid of the NRA. But I think one of the benefits of us being young people is that, like, there's a certain status quo and certain conventional wisdoms that are wrong, like that the NRA is all powerful and it's impossible to argue with the NRA or these, you know, nuts and freaks, or that we have to accept thoughts and prayers, and it's just not true. I mean, these are just people, just like you or me, and like people can be rallied against them, and sure that they have a lot of money, they have a lot of influence, but that hasn't stopped movements before, and I don't think it really deterred any of us.
I think it's also important to look at the actual makeup of the NRA and the fact that a lot of the things that the reason the NRA is doing things is not because it is there are people who support the NRA, but a lot of it is it's getting money, and it is an interest group for gun companies. And these gun companies would see a loss in profit if gun control was actually upheld in a lot of ways. And they don't want that to happen.
Right. I mean, the thing with the NRA is it's not an interest group for gun owners. There should be an interest group for gun owners. Definitely. It'd be great. But they shouldn't have a say in public health policy And the NRA represents the gun lobby. They represent the people making the guns. They get kickback from every gun sold from certain companies. Because the vast majority of gun owners are reasonable people, just like the vast majority of people in general, who, 97% want universal background checks. Saw a poll earlier, upwards of 70% of NRA members want stronger gun control. But the NRA has taken a position of absolutism, which is not reflective of its members. The only people they represent are the people who are earning profits.
I think the best way to look at those examples, like to see exactly how the NRA thinks, if you look at NRA TV, you'll see that almost every single TV show on NRA TV says sponsored by Smith & Wesson, sponsored by this gun company. It's not something for people, it's something for companies. And that's something that you have to realize when you're fighting this. You're not fighting this large group of people who think differently from you. You're fighting this organization that is, being paid to think this way.
It's a really small vocal minority, because most of the
Definitely.
country is on the same page about this.
So this small vocal minority, why has it been keeping any legislation from going past? What's been keeping everything? What's been creating these no action politicians?
Well, the small vocal minority, even though it is a minority, are still prepared to show up to board meetings and show up to these things. And there are a lot of, Congress people, or there's less now, because of recent, recent elections, who have completely taken money from the NRA and have had a benefit for voting with the NRA on certain issues. And there are other people who are scared of losing that money or getting a lower rating from the NRA because they feel like that will make them not win an election. I think that that's changing now, but that was how it was for a long time.
It's a small vocal minority with a ton of cash.
All right. Will the blue wave Democrats gaining the majority in House provide a stronger foundation for real reform?
Yes, but not because they're Democrats, because they are following the will of the American people. This movement doesn't believe in party or people; it believes in policies. There are good Republicans, there are horrible Democrats on this issue. A lot of them lost primary races. A lot of horrible Republicans lost their races. I do think, though, that we're going to see real gun control legislation that's supported by enormous swaths of the American people pass the House. If the Senate has a spine, it will pass then too, and hopefully the president will sign it. But I think until we have a solidly gun Senate and somebody in the White House, it's going to be a while for change to happen nationally. But sort of unnoticed by folks is that change is happening at the state level right now. 50 new gun laws have been passed since Parkland in half the states in this country. Some here in Maryland, like a bump stock ban, which just passed. Red flag laws, ERPA laws. These things are happening. And what you're going to continue to see is these policies being passed in city councils, state legislatures, even if Congress and the White House aren't willing to get on board.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I definitely think that it's important to look at these local issues, because there are a lot of local issues that have gotten completely changed by this movement, even if sometimes it's hard to see how the national laws have changed. There's so many things that are happening locally that are just amazing.
So one of the local policies has been about, one of the things that's been discussed is about arming teachers. What is your opinion of that? Would that help solve the problem?
I don't believe it would help solve the problem. I think that it would create problems. There are a lot of studies, and there's a lot of evidence to show that even police officers, a lot of the time, couldn't hit a target perfectly. And I mean, if you see a lot of the discussions of police brutality and things like that, I don't believe that it would be safe or it would be ethical to have teachers have guns, because I think that that could create more problems than it solves.
I mean, it's just insane, right? Like,
yeah, basically.
House is on fire. The way that you stop it being on fire is you take away the fire. You don't add more fire. You don't like pull out matches and get a flamethrower. The NYPD hits their target 30% of the time.
Exactly.
I don't know how accurate Miss Sezzi is going to be. You can also look at the less easy to explain, just like logistical problems of adding more guns to a situation. There was a case, I already forgot where it happened, but where there was someone at a nightclub, there was a shooting, the bodyguard shot the person who was doing the shooting, and the police came and shot the good guy with the gun. The way you stop these shootings is you can't stop a bad guy with a gun with a good guy with a gun. You need to stop the bad guy from getting the gun in the first place, which is what the American people want, and what will empirically prevent us from having to deal with this cycle of death.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I have had a lot of teachers who don't know how to use like the board in their classroom or their computer or any semblance of those things. I don't know if I'd 100% be comfortable with knowing that those people had a fire alarm. I love them to death, but I think that maybe that might not be the best idea. I also think that you have to worry about the fact that where would that firearm, that weapon that could kill someone, be safe when I don't know who could take that. There are, young children could be involved in that scenario. That is terrifying on so many levels. Just, it's such a bad idea.
Well, going back a little bit to the local state laws that are being passed, do you see it in the future, those being possibly contested in suits and maybe even going up to a higher level court?
Sure, I think anyone has a right to sue, but I think they're constitutional. I mean, I think one of the most successful things the NRA has done is imply that the Second Amendment is absolute in a way that no other amendment in our Constitution is. You can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater. You shouldn't have access to weapons that can kill 17 people in 5.5 minutes. I mean, there already are gun laws on the books, right? Like, we already have a background check system. It's not good, which is why we want to expand it, but we already have bans on things like fully automatic weapons. You can't go out and buy a machine gun. You can't buy a rocket launcher. You can't buy anti-aircraft weaponry. And those laws are constitutional because your right to the Second Amendment is not absolute. You have right to a firearm. You have right to responsible gun ownership. Absolutely. But you don't have a right to these giant murder machines to an unlimited extent.
So what do you see the long-term effects of this movement being? How do you see, do you just see more state-level gun laws? How do you see this movement progressing years in the future?
I think we've changed the conventional wisdom about gun control and gun violence prevention. Before, a lot of Democrats even were scared to throw their name behind things like an assault weapons ban, universal background checks. And we've changed that. We've changed the common line. The NRA is dying right now. Low membership, can't even afford to give their employees coffee anymore. And I also see an entire generation of young people like us who are now engaged in politics and believe that change is possible if we all come together and do the work. And I think the same people who are leading marches in cities across the country are going to go to college, going to take a few years, and then run for office themselves, and we're going to have a new moral majority in this country.
I also think that there's a level of people being more educated about this issue and people feeling like they can actually say something and speak out and not feel like this is a normal or this is okay, because I think we've proven that it's not. And I think we've proven that you have to say something, you have to do something for something to change. And I think that that's going to be important in the next few years.
What would you say to high schoolers who are feeling sort of powerless, even though these changes are being made? You know, they're not being made very fast. It's been a year since the actual rally took place. A year, 2 years now? It's
Less than a year.
Less than a year.
Yeah, but now less than a year means so much more because of how fast things move with media.
Yeah.
So what would you say to high schoolers that feel powerless, who feel like this movement isn't really going to go anywhere?
You know, Martin Luther King used to say that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I think what goes unsaid in that is that it's going to take all of us reaching up and bending the arc for things to change. I don't think you can sit in the sidelines and expect anything to happen. It will take every single one of us, regardless of what school we go to, what grade we're in, what our prior involvement is, for things to change, for laws to pass, for policies to become reality. I think everyone needs to get their hands dirty in the work of social justice for progress to happen.
Some of the most amazing activists I've met have been people who were not at all involved in anything to do with politics or anything to do with activism before March for Our Lives. These people didn't feel like they could say anything, they didn't feel like they could do anything, or they felt like that none of it really mattered. And then they realized that they could say something and that they did have a voice, and they're some of the strongest people I know. And being able to stand up for something, being able to say that something isn't okay is so important and something you have to do all the time. Being able to do that is one of the most amazing things you can do with your life. And I think that it's extremely important to be able to acknowledge that and to be able to do that.
So, if people want to get involved, how would you suggest that they do that? How would you suggest that they do that?
I think the first thing they should do is go to Twitter, look up MoCo for Change, Montgomery County Students for Change, and send a DM, get involved with that group. They're doing so much amazing organizing on the ground with gun violence prevention stuff right now. They're doing sit-ins, protests, organizing at the county council, at the state legislature, even doing lobbying days at Congress. That is, I think, the best pathway to getting involved in this movement right now.
And while they're on Twitter, they can go to @DC Teens Action on Twitter. We're also on Instagram, and they can DM or they can just follow us and see what we're up to. We have educational talks. We have different service projects you can get involved in. It's a great group, especially if you want to kind of branch out into other issues that are affecting DC specifically, but we do a lot of gun violence work also. If you go to WJ, which not everyone does, you can come join us at WJ Students Against Gun Violence. We do a lot of really cool stuff, and we do a lot of discussions and things like that. So it's a way to get involved. Look and see in your local school, see if there's a club. There probably is. If there's not, there's one around.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Thank
Awesome.
you.